Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Ben 10 Retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing episode 46 of classic Ben 10, Ken 10. And as I mentioned last week, this episode is supposed to take place in the future. And it's not like in the case of the Ben 10,000 episode, where the entire episode is pretty much just where Ben goes to visit his future self or something like that. In this case, the episode is actually entirely in the future. Like the episode, no, Ben does. There's nothing that Ben does not visit the future. There's nothing that actually has them meet. The only Ben in this entire episode is Ben 10,000, which for the purposes of this vlog, I'm just gonna call him Ben because again, there are no other Bens there, so I think it's just easier to call him that. So, but it's obvious. However, something to note is that it's obvious that some time has passed between this episode and the Ben 10,000 episode, as Ben is a little older, as he's got some gray in his hair this time. He's changed his shirt as it's the shirt he wore when he was 10 now. Max actually has physically changed, as he no longer has his, well, okay, he still has a little bit of a gut, but now he's skinnier and shorter. He doesn't have his beard, and his robotic arm is more pronounced. And the final thing of note, Ben has a son. A boy by the name of Ken, who in this episode is his 10th birthday, and he's getting all these nice gifts. Ben is able to make sure to be there, and of course Ben, Gwen, and Max all give him something. Max gives him a hoverboard. Gwen gives him this gives him a dog, which is more like one of Charmcaster's monsters, as it's a rock dog with the purple lines and so forth. But Ben actually gives Ken what I think but Ben of course gives Ken his own gift, and it turns out it's an Omnitrix. An Omnitrix that looks exactly like how his did when he was 10, and operates exactly the same, as it has 10 aliens as Ken only has access to 10 aliens, though only a handful are aliens that Ben had when he was a kid, and Ken can only be transformed for 10 minutes at a time, or if race against time is anything to go by. But anyway, so Ken is just excited this because this means he can be a hero and fight alongside his dad. And well, but when they actually go on to action, Ben is doing all the stuff while Ken kind of gets thrown on the sidelines. The first time gets thrown on the sidelines, which Ken doesn't really like, but Ben wants to do this for his own pretty much wants to do this for Ken's own safety, but Ken doesn't see it that way, so when they get back to the warehouse, when they get back to Ben's hideout, he storms off and starts flying around the city in his hoverboard. But while flying around, he runs into this kid named Devlin, who you can probably guess his relations by the name alone, but anyway, I'll just say that for later. But anyway, they become fast friends. Ken confides in Devlin. Devlin confides in Ken. They pretty much, it looks like they hit it off. They're going to be good friends, but then it goes to later that night as someone's attacking Ben's HQ, and of course, at first he decides that he's gonna let Ken help him out this time, but then this intruder breaks into the same room as them, and it turns out it's Kevin, which surprised me as a kid, as he shouldn't look like how he looks, because this is supposed to be like 32 years after after the original series, so he should look older, but he looks exactly the same. His hair is the same. The build is the same. Which, okay, maybe the mutated body wouldn't change if that was what he was for the whole time. But he still looks the same. But he looks the same. But Ben thinks it's him, so they run away. So he runs away, causes a lockdown, and he immediately sends Ken to his room because he doesn't want him fighting Kevin, which Ken objects to, but he's sent there via trapdoor or something, and so Ben and Kevin start fighting while Ken, not wanting to miss out on the fight, goes gray matter and starts going through the vents to wherever the fight is. But in the meantime, Ben and Kevin's fight gets them into the null void chamber, which apparently Kevin was after. But it turns out that after the Ben 10,000 episode, after Animo broke in and hacked the null void, Ben had moved the null void so that this would not happen again. So realizing that what he's after is not there anymore, Kevin makes an escape route, and Ben actually lets him escape because at that same time Ken managed to get in via the vents, and his Omnitrix timed out, and Ben Ben was distracted long enough for Kevin to escape. So Ben gets Ken out of the vents, but Ken is still mad because Ben still aced him out of a fight, and what makes it worse for Ken is the fact that Ben didn't tell him about the null void, which is a problem, actually, with the plot. I'll just talk about it now. Ken shouldn't know. Ken shouldn't know that the null void was moved. And if he did know, he should have known when he was a little kid. Why? Because this episode takes place 12 years after the Ben 10,000 episode. An episode where when we first saw Ben 10,000, he had no children. He had no relations, not even with his grandfather and cousin, whom were there when he first got his powers. Ken was not even conceived at that point. So here's what I'm saying. Ben said he moved the null void after Animo broke in. Why is Kevin outraged? Or Ken is outraged, sorry, I'm getting their names mixed up. But I don't understand why Ken is outraged. If he wasn't aware that the null void was moved, then I don't understand why. Like, what? I don't understand this, because it was moved before he was born. He shouldn't have any idea that it was ever moved. And if he did have an idea, it would probably be like, "Oh, hey, Dad, what's this big empty room for?" To which Ben would respond with, "Oh, it's where the null void. I had this thing called the null void projector in here. Bad guys are after it. I keep the room so that they don't. I keep the room so that it be a trap, but I can't let them get their hands on it." He shouldn't have an issue with this. He should know that it's been moved. That it's not supposed to be in this room. Even if Ben didn't tell him that this was the null void room, he should know that this was never where it was. This is never where it was. This should have been where it was. He should have no idea that it was ever moved in the first place. And yet, for some reason, that becomes a big deal. I don't understand that. It's just kind of become. I don't really get it. It's a nitpick, I admit, but it's a nitpick that actually drives more of the plot along, which does kind of get on my nerves a little. But so Ken steamed over the development that Ben didn't tell him about something he should already know. Just storms off again and meets up with Devlin. And says that they got into a fight with Kevin 11, and Devlin thinks that oh well, Kevin's bad news, but if he isn't he supposed to be in the null void? Well, what if more people got out? Maybe the null void projector's broken. So Ken suspects that maybe if they fix it, Ben will start respecting him more. So they decide they're going to hunt it down and fix it themselves, and Ken starts to have a suspicion of where it could be. As we've seen a bit throughout the episode, Ben has employed a new tool for catching bad guys. It's these things called null void eggs, which essentially act as Pokeballs. As Ben whenever Ben's battling an enemy and he gets him in the right position, he hits a switch, throws the null void egg at the enemy, and suddenly they're just sucked in. And after that, Ben gives them to Max so that he can send them to null void. So Ken suspects that maybe Max knows where it is. So when they go to the rust bucket, as Max goes out for a morning walk, they sneak in, and after snooping around, they manage to find a switch to a secret hatch to where the null void projector is, which makes me suspect that the rust bucket just stays in one spot nowadays, because if it has an elevator down there, then it's either the TARDIS or they just built something underneath it and built a hatch up to it, whatever. Either way, they find the null void projector, but before they can mess with it, Devlin runs towards it and starts messing with the controls. Ken tries to stop him, but then Devlin transforms into Kevin, which shocks Ken because he thinks, how are you Kevin? What's going on? But then Devlin knocks him aside and manages to activate the null void projector, and it turns out we learn the truth. Devlin is Kevin's son, which, again, should not be a shock considering... Because his design pretty much looks a bit like how Kevin looked when he was a kid, because he's got the same hair, he has similar fashion, he actually does look like Kevin is. He still looks kind of Kevin-ish, like it's not the same design, it's actually kind of the same thing with Ken, but I'll talk about that later. But even with the name Devlin, you can kind of suspect it. But either way, he activates the null void projector, and Kevin steps out, now human, but he does look intimidating. And so, after Devlin lets him out, Kevin decides to get payback. He sees Ken. He thinks he's Ben, but Devlin tells him it's just his son. But Kevin, because he's Kevin, decides that Ken will do just fine. So he go. So at that, because I'm gonna. So he smashes Ken's dog, who he'd been bringing along for this little night out. He manages to grab Kevin. He manages to grab Ken just as his Omnitrix times out, because Ken was Ditto. But at that time, Max comes in. He manages to turn off the Null Void. He manages to turn off the Null Void projector, but Kevin manages to overpower Max. And the next time we see them, they're tied up. And I don't really know what prompts Ben to go down there. I suspect maybe he checks on it every morning. I don't know. On the Null Void projector every morning. I don't know. But Ben rushes in. He sees his family. He sees his son and his grandfather tied up. But at that point, Devlin jumps on him. He manages to get away before he can fight. Kevin makes his presence known. And pretty much he's ready to fight Ben. And this is where we get the introduction of one of my favorite amalgam designs of Kevin's. Period. We get introduced to Kevin 11,000 as, because of Kevin's time in the Null Void, with all the Omnitrix powers he had absorbed also the powers of every other alien that Ben sent in. And as such, he transforms into an amalgam, which I suspect isn't of them all, but it's a pretty big amalgam, as he just transforms, shifts, and pretty much becomes this big hulking thing with a giant heat blast head, giant arms, tendrils, stinkfly wings, tendrils below. He's pretty, and I can't really do it justice. You kind of have to see it for yourself, but honestly, it's a very good design, and it is my favorite amalgam design for Kevin throughout all 4 shows. It is a great design. It's monstrous. It's huge. It's got. I think its best feature, what helps make it work, is the face. Like with Kevin, you had one eye that was gray matter eye, 4 arms eye, and it was human. But there's nothing human in Kevin 11,000. It is the heat blast face, but it looks monstrous because you got the fire. The rocks are black, and the face looks shriveled. It looks like a shriveled up skull with sharp teeth, one bug eye, one squinted eye. It looks terrifying, and it really does help you establish the character. On top of that, he still has a stinkfly, and there's still enough design elements that may help you realize who it is, because this arm is still heat blast, only it's much larger and more twisty. He still has the stinkfly wings, only one of them is now covered in heat blast molten rock, and he still has the forearm, and he still has kind of the body structure of 4 arms, complete with the Wildmud arms here. But it's intimidating, and it is amazing, and it is glorious. But anyway, Ben and Kevin get into a fight. Kevin actually manages to curb stomp Ben, but before he can finish him off, Devlin runs in because the only reason he went through with all this is because he just wanted to see his dad again. He said, "You proved you're the best we can be done," to which Kevin just knocks him aside and says, "I'm not doing this to prove I'm the best. I already know that. I'm doing this just because I like it, and it is glorious." Which admittedly kind of made me scratch my head when I was watching this episode again, because admittedly, he as a villain, I feel like he would be more twisted, but I think, ironically, I think this is what makes it work, because this was the mentality he had when he was a kid. You think maybe he would be more still be more twisted, but I think I think what makes him work is the fact that he never grew out of that mentality. That as he grew up, his hatred of the world just grew, and his arrogance grew too. He never changed. He never matured. In other words, he just became a monster, both physically and mentally. And I think that is what makes this design for Kevin a very good one. And it makes him very more threatening in terms of the power of his new amalgam form, and even just personality-wise, as he just wants to destroy Ben. He doesn't care who he has to get rid of in order to do it, but after he knocks Devlin aside, Ben gets back up and goes alien. They keep fighting. They get outside. Max manages to get himself and Ken free by using a little laser in his arm to it. And when Ken sees what's going on, he decides to go alien. He thinks he has a good choice of who he can use to fight Kevin. But in the meantime, the fight goes outside. Ben is still getting his ass beaten by Kevin, who manages to finally knock him down. But at that point, Ken runs in, and it turns out the alien he chose was gray matter, and that's because, don't ask me how, Gray Matter was actually smart enough to hack the Omnitrix. He was able to remove the limiter, so now Ken can transform between all of his aliens at will, as he goes Spitter, then Buzzshock, and shocks Kevin via Spitter's water. But even Kevin admits that's probably not going to be enough. But then Devlin comes in. He's had a change of heart because he now realizes his dad's a monster. So he's transformed. He hits him with a train. He hits him with a giant train cart. And then after he helps Ken back up, they both transform. They rush at Kevin, but he's still too powerful. He manages to knock them aside. Ken is knocked to the ground. As he's on the ground just struggling, Ben gets back up, and we get to my favorite moment in this entire episode. Just Ben looking pissed. Like he just sees Ken, he gets his face, he looks very angry. He looks at Kevin, and then suddenly you see a green flash, and we get the first in-show appearance, because he appeared one more time before this, and which is why I'm not going to be talking about him in full in this vlog. We get the first in-show appearance of Waybig. And if you don't know who Waybig is, he is a giant. His name speaks everything. He is a giant, a literal giant, and he proceeds to just pound Kevin into the ground until he actually manages to beat him back to his human form. At which point Ben turns back. He goes to tend to Ken. Ken is fine, and he managed to get it turns out he grabbed a null void egg before coming out here. But Kevin gets back up. He rushes at him. He knocks him aside. He thinks he's gonna win, but it turns out Ken dropped the null void egg after activating it, and Kevin is sucked in. So Max comes in. He takes the egg. Everything's happy. Ken's dog reforms, and then they give Devlin They pretty much allow Devlin to come to be with their family because he's a nice kid. And they're friends, and he's better than his dad, so yeah, in terms of like plot-wise, the episode is just a mere filler. But in all honesty, I think it's entertaining filler. Like it really does work for what it is. It's obviously just nice fun. Like just to see, because in this case, again, it's kind of I like going back to the Ben 10,000 timeline. It's a very good timeline. And I like seeing that we see Ben 10,000 has gotten better since the Ben 10,000 episode, as Max and Gwen are now closer in his life. Like, Gwen's not physically in the episode. She does appear, but only as as an astral projection, because she's off in another dimension hunting a red dragon or whatever. But either way, but it's nice seeing he's still close with them. It's nice that he has Max as a part of his life, and even making the null void eggs, which I think is a nice touch. Hold on a second. Sorry about that, laying my dog out in front. Anyway, I like seeing Ben. I like that we've seen some growth since the last episode. Even to the point, and on top of that, I like seeing Ken. Like with Devlin, who has a similar design to Kevin, but it's obviously not the same design. Ken has actually a very similar design to Ben, only his skin is darker because, according to supplemental material, his mother is Kai from the Ben Wolf episode. So he's got the same skin tone. His hair's kind of brownish, but kind of a darker brown. And his clothes actually look very similar to Ben's. Like, he has the same white T-shirt. He has the same green cargo pants, and he has black and white shoes. Only he actually has a belt. The pants are tighter, and his sneakers actually look a little different. But it's obvious. There's obviously enough similarities so that he's Ben's kid, and he's even voiced by Tara Strong. So he still has that. So it's nice. It's even more parallel. Which, even considering when he goes alien, because in the episode, whenever he goes alien with the Omnitrix, all of his aliens look how they looked when Ben transformed into them when he was 10. With, I think, the exceptions being Spitter and Buzzshock, because Ben didn't have access to them when he was 10 years old. But anyway. I already went off on a rant about this, but I love this incarnation of Kevin. It's my favorite incarnation, because it is the most twisted version of him. Like, again, watching him, I kind of thought to myself, is this really the most twisted version? But I kind of realized to myself, it is, sort of. Because, again, as I mentioned, he never grew out of his mentality. He's still the same bratty kid that he was when he was 11, but now he's grown up. but now he's grown up. His arrogance has reached his peak, and his anger has grown to the point where he just likes killing things. And again, and it really, and in that mindset in an adult, and even an adult that powerful, is a dangerous thing. On top of that, again, as I mentioned before, I love the Kevin 11,000 design. It is one of my favorite amalgam designs for Kevin. It is monstrous. It's huge. It's got massive power, and it looks terrifying. As I mentioned before, with a heat blast, shriveled up skull head, it is very intimidating, and it really does well in being and it really does well. I like seeing that. I also like seeing that we get more of the Ben 10, get more of Ben 10,000. More of the Ben 10,000, as we actually do see Ben Mummy as an adult, and he's changed more to resemble what the Mummy looked like, except with green instead of purple. And as mentioned before, we got to the first in-show appearance of Waybig, who I'm not going to be talking about my thoughts on Waybig in this one, because as I mentioned before, this was not his first appearance. His first appearance was in the first movie we'll be looking at, which we'll be getting to in about 3 to 4 weeks. But bottom line, I'm going to save my thoughts for him then, but otherwise, this was his first in-show appearance, and it was glorious. It was freaking glorious. That ending was, I think the climax is the best part. I think my biggest problem, however, is my problems with that are just kind of story progression in general. Like the first 2/3 are fine, but then when the null void is moved, I brought up I already talked about my complaint with Ken getting angry that the null void was moved, even though he should not have even known it was moved in the first place. Even if he did, he should know that it was not in that same location. So that's my problem. And even the ending, like with how Max came in, how did Ben know about all this stuff? It's small things. There are things that kind of hamper. Again, it's stuff that hampers my enjoyment a little, but not enough. I don't as part of what makes me part of what Ken's angered is from that Ben didn't tell him, which again he shouldn't have any problem with, but whatever. Otherwise, I think it's a good episode. I loved seeing Kevin 11,000. I loved seeing more of the future world. I love seeing these designs. I love seeing Ken. But with all this said, how would I compare this episode to the Ben 10,000 episode? Personally, I prefer the Ben 10,000 episode over this one, and only by a little. And that's because I think the Ben 10,000 episode is better in that there's more of a lesson learned. That one kind of felt more in place. This one was more. I think that's my big problem. It had more character development. As at that point, Ben had been a hero. 10-year-old Ben had been a hero for a while, and to see his 30-year-old self become more of a jerk, we get to see some cool action, a clash of generations, and it helps more for character development, and even seeing that Ben's attitude can have some benefits. In this episode, it's just a filler. It's entertaining filler. It's a very nice filler, but it doesn't really do much for the overall. It doesn't really do much for the show. It's showing Ben in his future. Some nice action, some nice future iteration, some cool stuff. It's a good episode, but I think I'd take the Ben 10,000 episode over in this one, only because that one, because it featured Ben, allowed for some actual nice character development on both Ben and Ben 10,000's part. And while this one does have character development for Ben 10,000, it's only for this episode, and it doesn't really tie in anything else in the series. So, yeah. Because this episode's filler, I prefer Ben 10,000 over it. But that's just my personal preference, and even then, I still think this is a fun episode. It's fun. It's action packed. I love Ben 10,000. I love seeing the more future stuff. Just a fun episode. So, yeah. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in next week where we will be looking at the lost episode of Ben 10. So, yeah. Again, thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll see you next week. Take care.